Hey everyone, welcome to the Fuel the Fight podcast. Lieutenant Colonel Nick Behringer here. Another great episode. Another great two guests. You got two guests for the price of one today. We got a guest on location at the beach. It's amazing. But let me start off. We have Major Jennifer Mullins, physical therapist at our Doctorate of Physical Therapy program, joining us today as a co-host. And then the guest of honor, Lisa Maximus. Lisa's an elite trainer, mom, elite power lifter, all around awesome human being, and also kind enough to join us today while her family is on vacation from where? Key West? Is that where you're at?
That's where we are, yeah.
Okay, from Key West, Lisa, welcome to the Fuel the Fight podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, and so, one of the things we wanted to talk about today, both Jennifer and I, is postpartum kind of recovery, from that, traumatic event that is childbirth, and then how we can get female warfighters, how they can kind of get back into training. Because I don't know if you're familiar with this, but we have a new, Army combat fitness test, and one of the assessments is the deadlift, a heavy deadlift. We have there's a
which
plank,
is awesome. I'm so glad that's added.
No, it is awesome. And we've got a plank, we've got a medicine ball throw, we have a sprint drag carry where you're dragging 90 pounds, you're carrying two 40-pound dumbbells, 2-mile run, medicine ball throw with a 10-pound medicine ball throw. So a more athletic and dynamic test, a more awesome test, but also a more physically demanding test. And so just kind of want to talk about how we can help our female warfighters get back in that.
Absolutely.
One of the things wanted to talk to you about is the kind of the pelvic floor health during pregnancy. And, what are the things they can do to kind of, training wise to avoid that risk and injury postpartum?
So I want to talk a little bit about it because there are a few misconceptions about pelvic floor health. First of all, men and women both have it. So it's funny that it's like a women specific issue because we kind of pay for, if you will, having problems with our pelvic floor. So unfortunately, women, we have an issue, and actually this is becoming more and more popular on social media and stuff, with women, having incontinence, right? When they're deadlifting, or when they're squatting, or when they're having some sort of, jump rope or burpee off in the gym. It's kind of a joke that any woman who has had children runs to the restroom before we do jump rope. But actually, women who haven't had children can also have that issue. There are women who have incontinence issues without even childbirth. And so there was a lot of research going into why that is. And they talk a lot about having weakness, right? You need to do Kegels and just strengthen your pelvic floor. And what we're finding is actually you can be too tight. So you can overwork your pelvic floor. And so you can have incontinence issues because you have too much tension or too much tightness in the pelvic floor. And so there's a lot of research going into, so then you go, do I have incontinence because I have too much tension or I'm too tight? Or do I have incontinence because I need to tighten up? And there are professionals and people who just do pelvic floor rehab, pelvic floor, deal with pelvic floor issues. And there's even now you can go and there's units of measurement, so they can actually tell you how much you're contracting, your muscles, whether it's right, your anus or your behind, or Kegeling in that area. So, in the pelvic floor. So it's an interesting line of work that we're really starting to learn more and more and more about. As far as prenatal goes, so women who are going into childbirth, one of the best pieces of advice was every time that you go to the bathroom, so every time you urinate, if you can stop twice. So, because that way you're doing it a couple of times a day that way the strength is there. Because my thing is like, hey, if you're too tight, you're probably having incontinence issues before you got pregnant. If you haven't had incontinence issues, making sure that you have the muscle control and building awareness or musculature down there in that region is a good idea. So that is, for me, one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give out is doing Kegel exercises. Every time you go to the bathroom, you can stop the flow once or twice, And that way, you can kind of gauge where you're at. Are you able to do that? Are you not able to do that? And kind of figure out even where your pelvic floor is before you go into childbirth.
No, that.
So that's, huh?
That's great. No, and it kind of, I was going to ask about Kegling, so keep going. No.
Yeah, so that's again kind of where we start, and then after that, it really depends on the childbirth. So there's a lot of women who have issues coming back, whether they had a C-section or vaginal birth, right? So then that you get into that, and so depending on the severity of ripping, tearing, damage that happens with childbirth. Some women have it extensively, while other women have like almost no trauma at all, or have no issue with incontinence postpartum. Now, some women think that you can get away without having trauma by having a C-section. I'm going to be very upfront and say that I had elective C-sections with both my kids, with both my boys. And so I wanted to avoid pelvic floor damage. My mom ended up having to have a hysterectomy because she had prolapse from the damage from childbirth. And so, which this kind of goes down a little bit of a rabbit hole. I don't want to go too far down, but if you have uterine prolapse, they use a net to kind of pull you up, almost like a hernia, like surgery, where you kind of lift and pull up. But if you're having uterine prolapse or bladder prolapse, a lot of times it doesn't work, just doesn't take. And so you end up having to have a hysterectomy. And then when you have a hysterectomy, you kind of have to decide whether you leave your ovaries or not. And if you leave your ovaries and get ovarian cancer, there's no way to detect it because you no longer get pap smears. You can't, the ovarian cancer can kind of go undetected. And so if you leave the ovaries to have your estrogen, that's where estrogen comes from, you can get ovarian cancer, which most likely will kill you because it's hard to detect. Or you take the ovaries with you and then you're in menopause at an earlier age. So depending on when you get the hysterectomy. So do you leave the ovaries? Do you take the ovaries? And then if you take the ovaries, you deal with losing your estrogen. And so it kind of gets complicated. Women are a little bit complicated. So, that's why talking about it is a really big deal and then the other side is that every woman is so different. So I had C-sections with both my boys, and I do not have any incontinence or pelvic floor issues. So I don't pee when I deadlift. I can jump, run, sprint, all those things, and I don't have issues. That being said, I've been doing Kegling when I was a kid. Like I heard someone say that you should stop yourself from urinating twice every time you go to the bathroom. I started doing that when I was like 16 years old. And so is that the reason why? I don't know. Is it because I had a C-section? I don't know. I have a lot of girlfriends who are, Olympic athletes and have, had incontinence issues before they even got pregnant. Now, again, even when depending on what kind of birth you have, whether you have C-section or vaginal birth, carrying the baby. So just the pressure of having the baby in your belly puts pressure on the pelvic floor. So one thing that I recommend is no running. So I encourage women. Now there's, again, everything has a if and or but behind it. So I encourage women not to run when they're pregnant. Just again, the weight of the baby on the pelvic floor can do a lot of damage. That being said, if your mental health lies in getting outside and going on a run, you get outside and go on a run. Like if that's what keeps you sane for your pregnancy and that's how your body feels healthy and that's how you feel mentally healthy, don't stop doing what makes you feel good on the inside. But if you're a person who kind of doesn't like running all that much and you're like, I could take it or leave it, I suggest not doing, jogging or running while you're pregnant just to save that pelvic floor, just to save some of the stretching and damage, because it is still tissue. Yes, there's muscle, but there is still tissue. So, you can't ever really rebuild it, if that makes sense. Like when you have a child, yes, you can Kegel till the cows come home. But if you have, a lot of tissue tearing, you don't necessarily, you may never fully heal. So having full incontinence isn't necessarily normal. Having some incontinence is considered normal, if that makes sense. Because a lot of women, like I said, it's getting kind of popular to post and or just be okay with the fact that, incontinence happens when you deadlift, especially in my field, in the powerlifting world. A lot of women will pee when they deadlift, and we're trying to normalize it. Like, get over it. We pee when we deadlift. And it's like, yes, it does happen. Yes, it is normal, but fully emptying your bladder, not normal. There is something that you should be doing for that. So if you are a person who's soaking through a pad when you're deadlifting, you need to start doing pelvic floor work and or seeing a PT or a specialist to work on your pelvic floor. A little bit is fine. Again, normal, especially if you're postpartum. But if you're emptying your full bladder, not normal. You need to get that. Like, you need to start looking at it, working on it, getting a PT or a pelvic floor therapist.
No, that's all great information there. And Jennifer, did you have some stuff to add?
Lisa, you had said so many wonderful things. I'm glad that you got out there. But absolutely, just because it's typical doesn't mean it's normal. And in so many ways, I'm so thankful that people are talking about this. But at the same time, just because it's happening doesn't mean this is the new normal. It doesn't mean we need to embrace wearing a pad all the time because we might pee. Like, that's not the normal I'm looking for.
100%. And it's funny because we're just starting to talk about it, which I think is so good.
And I love what you said about men having a pelvic floor too. I mean, one of the first experiences I had with pelvic floor dysfunction was actually from a male following an airborne jump. So especially in the military where we have these dynamic controlled falls from great heights, doing awesome things, will expect your body to need to adjust and adapt to that. So, call out to the men. Pelvic floor dysfunctions happens there as well. You also have a pelvic floor. So I hear you on all of those things. I love what you said also about kind of the muscle. And then so if a woman were to have a vaginal delivery and she did have some tearing, so we're going to have that scar tissue in there, which is not contractile. And so that woman's going to just need to be proactive. I think that you're totally right. We need to get ahead. So the new mama that's facing this ACFT coming up, she's probably nervous because this is her job and now she's got to provide for her baby too. What she does love running. She's worried about being strong, maybe for the first time. She wants a vaginal delivery. What would you tell her? What things can she be doing during her pregnancy to just both allay maybe some of her stress and to keep her focused on maybe some of those task-specific exercises like the deadlift or like the plank or the push-up?
Yes. So when we talk about, being prenatal or postnatal for things like this, first of all, women need to learn how to, again, back to the women-men thing, men too. But when we're talking specifically about pregnancy, when it comes to women and bracing, women don't know how to brace their core. And so and again, men do this too, but bracing down is a problem.
Yes. So can you speak to that? This
yes,
bearing down versus bracing in, because that is nuanced, Lisa, and people don't. I worry that women think they're kegling, but what they really are is just pushing down.
They're pushing out.
Yes.
100%. And I think it actually happens a lot more than we think it does.
I believe
so. What I've learned is that a lot of people bear down, and it's a really difficult thing. First of all, you don't know what's happening. Mm-hmm. So I can't just be like, oh, I can see you're bearing down. Unfortunately, I can't see it. I can see when your core is not engaged, but I can't see what you're doing on the inside.
Yes.
And so I oftentimes tell people to hold it. So almost like, and again, sometimes my cueing is a little bit vulgar.
Get it out there.
But when we're just gonna go with it. So when you're deadlifting, you need to act like you're holding in gas.
Yep.
Right, like you're holding in a fart or you're holding your pee.
Yes.
And so you want to pull up, but that doesn't mean suck in.
Yes.
Right, and so this is two things that I have to cue on women a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Pushing and not sucking in with your abs. Right, mm-hmm. So there's sucking in and pushing out. Mm-hmm. You don't want either one of those.
Yes.
And the word that I use is called stacking. So how I describe it is, envision your abs as like a six pack, okay? Mm-hmm. Whether you can see them or not doesn't matter. If you envision your abs like a bunch of bricks and envision them separated from each other. So if you're leaning back, your abs are open, if you will. They're all separated. There's space between each brick, right? Mm-hmm. And when you crunch downward, bringing your rib cage toward your hip bone, so almost like you're rounding your lower back out, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're flexing your abs at the same time, your bricks, if you will, should touch each other. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? And so what I tell people is take your thumb and put it on the bottom of your rib cage. Take your pinky finger and put it on the top of your hip bone. Mm-hmm. So that's your space. You have space there. And when you arch your back, your fingers will stretch. There's not much room between the pinky and the thumb.
Right.
And if you bring your rib cage down towards your hip bone, there's space between your pinky and your thumb. So that's what I want you to do, is drive your rib cage toward your hip bone. So you're going to kind of crunch down. That's the brace you want before your lift. Then you kegel up and push out on and flex your obliques, kind of not push out, but like flex out on your obliques. So you're filling your whole core. It's not just the middle, it's the sides as well. Does that make sense?
It does. And Lisa, then take us that next step. Now tell me how doing that is going to improve the power output in my deadlift. Now that I have this strong core, tell me how that makes my lift stronger.
So most of the time when people deadlift, the breakdown happens in the midsection. So envision I handed you a pipe, a straight pipe that has no bend in it at all. And I said, bend this pipe. It's not going to bend, right?
Right.
Now envision I handed you a pipe and I indented the middle. And I was like, bend this pipe. Where is it going to bend? In the middle, correct?
Right.
The breakdown's going to happen where the bend is, where the indent, where there's an indent. The same concept goes with your core. So when your core, I'd say it's like a brick house. If you build this big, core, this big, strong brick house, you're not going to have breakdown in the middle of your back. And that is most of the time where people fall in their deadlift, okay? Where they have a little bit of rounding in their back, they freak out, they drop the bar and say, I can't do it, it's too heavy, I feel it in my back.
Yeah.
First of all, you're gonna feel it in your back, okay? Your back straps are some of the biggest muscles in your body, along with your lats. But you're gonna feel this in your lower back. And people get really scared to feel anything in their lower back. Your lower back has muscles the same way that your biceps do, your quads do, your hamstrings do. You have huge back straps that run along your spine. So one of the biggest weaknesses with women, especially when they start deadlifting, is their back. I'm like Oprah with the back. I'm like, you have a weak back, and you have a weak back, and you have a weak back. And they're all like, oh, I think my back's pretty strong. And I'm like, nope. So I'm really into working the back. Okay. How do you work the back? What do I mean by back? Good mornings, Romanian deadlifts, seated lat pulls with body language. Everyone likes the stiff movement. I'm all about body language. So you'll sit in a cable machine and you'll lean forward and then you row back. So you use your whole body. Again, you're using your back. So I torch people with back work. One of the most sore people get when they start training with me is their back. So my point being, so when we tying it back in, when we build this big core and we have all this big breath, you kegel up, you flex out on your oblique, you build your brick shit house in your core, breathe and brace, grab the bar, and you pull, whether you're a conventional sumo pull, it doesn't matter. You're not going to have the breakdown in the back. Does that make sense? So I'm taking that pipe, and instead of having an indent in the pipe where you can bend it, there's no more indent. So now you're just like a crowbar pulling the bar off the ground.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
That's such a great visual.
Yeah.
I used to tell my patients that like the core is like if I told you to go up to the top of a high dive and to do this big fancy dive off the end of the board, but I never actually secured the ladder side, how good would your dive look? It'd be terrible. You would be falling. But the core is that secured location. Your legs, your hips, your shoulders, your arms, they can't do anything unless they've got something solid to be anchored on. And that's that core. But also, Lisa, the pelvic 100%. floor, the unsung hero of the core.
Yes. And if you're not, it's kind of like plugging the tank, right? Where anytime that you have leak, oh my God, I almost just said leakage. It's not but anytime that you have, like breathing out. So if you're in starting your pull and you've let your breath out, which actually we can talk about in a second because it's a postpartum. There's a couple of cues that you can help with incontinence postpartum. But so remind me to talk about that. But whenever you have energy leaking, by that I mean form breakdown, your feet sliding, your hands slipping. This is all losing energy. Okay. So for me, like, again, I'm an interesting person to watch. I have a really wide stance, happens to be where my leverages are, but I have to put grip tape under my feet because if my feet slide, it's number one, losing energy, but two, very scary. So if I feel like my feet are about to slip, not only am I going to tear my groin, but if I come down with 400 pounds, it's going to land on my foot. So I have to be very careful as far as grip under my feet goes. But again, it's losing energy. So anytime that you're not tight, so if you're losing energy through your pelvic floor, you're losing energy through your breath, you're losing energy through your arms, you're losing poundage on the bar. So some of the biggest cues, again, I start with core and then it's lats. People forget that lats exist in a deadlift. And almost every single person that I talk to, we have to lock their lat down because their lats are out. And when your lats are out, the bar is floating away from you. The bar's too far away from your midline. And as we know, anything that's further away from your midline gets significantly heavier, right?
Yes.
And so it's like holding a cup, cup out with an extended arm or holding a cup in, or a weight, how heavy would it be by the end of the night? So anyway, it's majorly important. So we fix the bracing, the breathing, bracing. And I think the breathing is when the Kegeling comes into play. So when you breathe in through your stomach, you pull up through your, Kegel upwards, and then brace down in the oblique. And then we lock our lat, and then we lean back and pull. So that's my cueing for deadlift.
So this woman who's currently pregnant or recently postnatal, it sounds like you are focused on the back, you are focused on the lats, and you are working on those cues to just lock in that core. So even if she's not able to jump out there working on that 3 rep max deadlift, she can start working in these areas.
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing too, so going into that postnatal part that I was talking about with breath work. So if you're a person who is coming back, you just gave birth, you're working on your pelvic floor, but you don't feel like you're there yet, but you still want to deadlift without causing more damage or being uncomfortable. There's a couple of things that you can do when you're deadlifting to not feel as much intense with the pelvic floor. So one of the cues is letting the breath out. So when you go to start pulling, instead of holding and pulling, because that's when you're going to feel the most pressure in the pelvic floor, you kind of breathe through a small straw. Okay, so don't go and let all your air out like you just let go of a balloon, but breathe through a cocktail straw. So as you're pulling, you're ever so slightly letting the air out. It can take and relieve some of the pressure on the pelvic floor. The other one is not taking a big breath at all, is actually breathing all the way out and then bracing your core and pulling. So not having your lungs or your belly full of air at all. So those are two things that, again, when you start working into that 1 rep max range again, that you don't want to pull without air, or you do not want to pull letting air out. This is postpartum. I'm getting back into lifting. I'm working on my pelvic floor, but it's not there yet. These are little things that you can do to just ease back into it without putting too much pressure on the pelvic floor. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love it, Lisa.
Lisa, so I love the talk. This is great stuff. I love this information. Now, I'm gonna put my dietitian hat on. My bias is so nutrition and pregnancy. I know that's a big issue. I work with my wife through 2 kids and we're about to have our third. So what was your approach, kind of your nutrition, like during pregnancy and then even like the postpartum time there?
So I actually had an interesting. I'm kind of a case study. I did very different things with both my kids. So in going into pregnancy with Jax, actually my first, I was doing more of the Jim Jones style training. And let me preface that a little bit with, it was intense interval training, a lot of cardiovascular work. I wasn't lifting very heavy. Like my deadlift then was like 275 on a good day. And I always made a joke, if I could deadlift 300 pounds, I would mic drop in fitness. I didn't know anyone who could deadlift 300. And that was my goal. And after I had Jax, I actually had breastfeeding issues. I really wanted to breastfeed and I couldn't produce enough milk. And my pediatrician told me to, and here's another thing that I wanted to hit on, is who do you see? And maybe even you can answer this. Who do you see with mom? So after we give birth, because I have a lot of women who want pelvic floor help, they don't know what doctor to ask. You don't ask your pediatrician. You don't ask your OBGYN. Your general doctor doesn't know. There's not really a doctor for postpartum moms, right? Because my OB wouldn't help me with breastfeeding. My general doctor wouldn't help me with breastfeeding. My pediatrician wouldn't help me with breastfeeding. I had to go find a lactation consultant. And so anyway, so when going through all of that, we talked about cardiovascular work. It can, in some people, not everybody, intense cardiovascular work can impact breast milk supply or milk supply. So they were like, lay off the cardiovascular work completely. And I was like, okay, so just lift then. I'm like, yeah, just lift. Don't do cardio. So I went and just did strict lifting, and which is, by the way, what I loved anyway. I was like, well, I really like lifting. Can't I just lift? Like, yeah, it's called powerlifting, and you can do that. So that's actually how I got into it. So my second pregnancy, all I did was lift. And I had a much better experience. I had a better, easier childbirth, better recovery, better pregnancy, no pain in my lower back. I had no pain in my neck and shoulders, zero pain altogether physically. And my body fat was way better on my second than my first. So my first pregnancy, my body fat went from like 20 pounds or 20% body fat to 32% body fat. And with my second pregnancy, when I was postpartum, I was only 23% body fat. So like my body composition was much different between the cardiovascular training and the weight training. So my body responded much better to the strength training than it did to the cardiovascular work. My diet didn't really change that much. So when I was pregnant, one of the biggest things you have to be careful with is blood sugar. So when I got into my second trimester, after about 45 minutes to an hour of training, I started to get a little shaky and dizzy. So I always made sure that I had a snack, something with sugar in it. So a banana, an apple, something like that, a yogurt with some fruit. And I always just kind of had that on hand. And I ended up having to go from 2 training sessions a day to 1 training session a day. So that was kind of how I managed, training and nutrition. But other than that, I went with what I craved. I got really sick. So my first trimester, I ate an embarrassing amount of bagels and cream cheese and Honey Nut Cheerios, which I don't like to admit. But that was my reality. By the third trimester, I was back into my salads. But I listened to my body. And again, with my second pregnancy with Hunter, I was sick the whole time. So my nausea didn't really go away, didn't really dissipate. But I just ate what I wanted to. I think that when you're pregnant, your body kind of tells you what you need.
Yes.
So as long as you're getting enough fruit, servings of fruits and vegetables in a day, I think it's totally okay to give in a little bit and have things that I wouldn't normally eat, like the cereal, like the bagels and cream cheese. Again, with the strength training, my body composition and it just felt better in my body, right? It's not about a number. And so I share those numbers with you, not because I care about how much, fat I gained or weight I gained. I wasn't worried about it. I know that I was healthy, and my OB was, very open and talking to me about being healthy and all, how much to gain and all that. And so anyway, I felt healthier. I was healthier when I was doing my strength training versus my cardiovascular work.
No.
If that answers that question.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I do want to, because we didn't want to touch on this. I don't think I mentioned you're a power lifter. But I mean, your deadlift, what do you deadlift? Over 400 pounds at a body weight of 123 for competition. Is that?
Yeah. I'm working on my 430 pound deadlift. I've hit 420 and 425 in the gym. So I need to whip it out in competition. It's hard to do after a max effort squat. So it's one of those things that deadlift is at the end of the day. And so, it's hard to do in comp, but that's my goal.
That's impressive. So. That's probably more than I deadlift.
Thanks.
So I do want to, so for the listeners to understand, like when we're asking you about these things, like not only do you train, high level athletes, but you yourself practice it and do it quite successfully.
Yeah, very
Thank
impressive,
you.
Lisa. And I just want to add, what
you
you said with your experience, your different experience with your pregnancies, I think was so good. And it just built on what you said earlier, that like it's really got to be different. I'm going to just do a small shout out to the runners out there. I do enjoy lifting, Lisa. I love running. But I with both of my deliveries, I had my breast milk supply was more than enough with the running. But I think that what you said regarding doing what your body wants and listening to that and giving yourself just that extra margin during your I'm like, look, pregnancy is so tough, mamas. Like, give yourself a little margin to have those Cheerios, and I love that you did that. And I think that's
that's my thing. So this is what I want to say, and I love what you just said about giving yourself some grace and also about listening to your body. When I talk about lifting, that's me,
yes.
right? That was my experience. It's what I'm passionate about. That does not mean by any stretch of the imagination that running is bad, that you need to just strength train,
Mhm.
the biggest thing to do is find something you enjoy, so you
Yes.
do it, right?
Yes.
Please
Yes.
don't do something you hate. If you hate going to yoga, stop going to yoga. If you hate running, please stop running.
Stop.
It's my
Stop.
point just being is I thought I
Yes.
had to do those things. I
Yes.
thought I had to do these IWTs and these, intense
Yes.
1 minute all out on an airdyne and my 2K row time and my 60-minute
Yeah.
row for max meters, and all that was just, I just pounded myself in the face with it every day.
Oh.
And then I was like, can't I just lift? I just like lifting. Can't I just lift? And they're like, yeah, actually you can. It's called powerlifting. It's a sport. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. And that's where I found my happiness. That's where I found my passion. That's where I found, I was good at it. I liked it. I cared about it. That's when I started eating, sleeping,
Yes.
recovering, living for my sport. That's when my aesthetic changed for the better. That's when my mentality changed for the better.
Yeah.
That's when, for me, everything lined up. That's when I found true happiness as far as what I was passionate about doing with my body, how I enjoyed spending my time. And so I always encourage people to find your thing, right? There isn't, and again, you'd think that women were told to run and do cardio. That's how you're going to find your aesthetic. Not true. Not true. So some women do better, with strength training and less cardio, depending on how your cortisol is, and it can actually balance your hormones out and give you a better aesthetic. So square peg, round hole, we all are a little bit different. Don't try to force yourself into a hole that doesn't suit you or fit you. And same thing with nutrition. And I have people who tell me, when I get pregnant, I don't care how I feel. I'm going to force myself to go to the gym. And I'm like, you better not. You better not. Do not force yourself to go to the gym if you don't feel like it. During your pregnancy, you're doing this miraculous thing called building a child, which I think is the most amazing thing you will ever do in your entire life. It is the coolest, most amazing thing. I remember looking at my children, and I remember looking at my kids' eyelashes and fingernails. And I remember thinking to myself, holy, like my kid has eyelashes. Like my body made eyelashes and fingernails, which I thought was so weird and creepy and amazing. I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Yes. And that, again, it changed the way I looked at my body. I was like, okay, instead of being mad at my body for what it's not looking the way I wanted it to, not being the way I wanted it to, I was like, let's start respect. Like, hell yeah, body. Hell yeah. Like, you just grew eyelashes and fingernails, body. Like, you deserve a round of applause. Like, you're making milk? Like, your body's making milk for a baby, and the saliva goes from the baby's mouth through the nipple into your brain and says, it needs more your baby needs more carbohydrates today. Your baby needs more fat today. Like, there's communication between you and your child postpartum, mamas.
Yes.
Like, after you give birth, you wonder why you're tired, why you're, how do you, I'm still so tired. I don't feel like myself. I'm like, because you still have hormones and your body's still doing so many amazing things. That's where that patience comes in, right? Yes, we can still train. Yes, we can still be aware of our nutrition. Yes, we can still push ourselves in the gym, but we need to have that patience and that compassion and that love. Like, you just built a child and then delivered the child, and you're still working with your child, right? When you hear your child scream on a playground, that was your child.
That's right.
You're connected. You can hear your central nervous system is wired to be on alert and protect this baby every moment of every day.
Yep.
So it's, again, being able to work with yourself, but also give yourself a round of applause, because you deserve it. It is one of the hardest things you will ever do. And then you deal with mom guilt when you're not with your work. Okay, I'm gonna work on my fitness. I'm gonna go to the gym.
Go on. Yes.
God, I still deal with it. I'm on vacation, and I hired a sitter to watch my youngest son, so I could take my older son snorkeling. And I'm like breaking down in tears, leaving him. And I'm like, I'm doing the right thing. He can't go on this. He's just gonna be sitting on the boat, like not crying if I go on. And I'm like, just focus on Jax. Like, this is a really great time for you to, and I'm just sitting on my heartstrings. I'm being pulled in two different directions. I'm like, what is this? What is going on?
You got to be a tough mother. You got to be tough to be a mother, because there's no way to please yourself.
You do. You don't please yourself. You always seem to be not pleasing your kids.
Yep.
I mean, it's like, you're trying to be everything to everybody. And then not only that, not only are you trying to be a mom, and not only trying to take care of yourself, and you're trying to work on your fitness, but if you're married, you're trying to be a wife. You're trying to be a daughter to your mother. You're trying to be a friend to your girlfriend.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something that I struggled with majorly when I get competitive. I mean, I'm not around a lot of moms who compete in an elite level sport. And it's hard to be like, hey, I can't go out for your birthday dinner. I have a competition the next day. Like I have a meet. Or, okay, well then let's just go out for let's go out and grab a coffee and, a pastry. And I'm like, yeah, but I got to make weigh-ins like on Friday. Like, so I can't really do that on Thursday because then I have weigh-ins on Friday and then I compete on Saturday. And so I can't, and they're like, oh, you're just so lame.
Yeah.
And I'm like, ouch, ouch. Like I'm actually working towards this really huge goal. And like, it takes a lot of sacrifice, not only time away from my husband, time away from my kids, time away from, certain things to be, I train it from 6 to 9 o'clock at night on my heavy lifting days. Mm-hmm. So, 3 nights a week, I'm at the gym from 6 to 9 p.m. I mean, that's, time away from my kids. And again, my husband, dinner, and it's a sacrifice.
Yes.
But it's the only time I have to focus on me. I work all day too. Mm-hmm. So, it's balancing, your self-care. And then again, we talked about the guilt. And then there's recovery, there's mm-hmm. sleeping, there's ice baths, there's saunas, there's massages, there's, how do you balance all this stuff? And it is a puzzle, right? It's a puzzle to fit it all in. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of it is knowing that when you take care of yourself and you're happy, you're a better mom, you're a better partner, you're a better friend, you're a better version of yourself versus saying yes to everything and spreading yourself too thin.
And I'm learning to embrace seasons too. So, this is what this
yes.
season looks like, but this is not my forever. There's this season mm-hmm. with little kids. And I wanted to ask you about that too. So you're talking about sleep and we're talking about nutrition and training, but that's going to look different in a mom with season with 1 or 2 littles or more versus older elementary age kids versus maybe kids that are out of the house. How do you coach women in these different seasons of motherhood and fitness and, all of the things?
Okay. So this is where Lisa Maximus is going to come out a little bit. I'm going to say something rude. Okay, you ready?
Yes.
If you're a mom and your kids are 5 years old, I love you, but I'm sorry, you cannot call yourself postpartum anymore. Okay? Like, we're no longer postpartum. You're no longer in a transformation. Okay? You have
postpartum.
A 5-year-old. You're post. Right? You're a year. If your child is 1 year old, we're no longer postpartum. Like you're now yourself. And now. I know that healing is still happening, and I know that some people deal with way more damage, and there are people out there that it takes a year. But if you can see section at 6 weeks, and then you're cleared to go, right? You're ready to go, and so again, without complications. So not speaking to anyone with extenuating circumstances and extreme complications. So you do need to take accountability for yourself and your life and your nutrition and your training, and you can, mamas, get out there and not only be of who you were before you got pregnant, you can be a better, stronger, faster, fitter version of yourself postpartum.
That's right.
And not only myself, but every woman that I've worked with is in better shape physically, aesthetically, mentally, emotionally after they had kids. I have spoken to so many women who have seen that and dealt with that. So you can get fit and you can get back to where you were, or I like to say a better version of who you were. I am stronger, faster, better than I have ever been. I just did a workout with Bobby yesterday where he keeps trying to torch me with I started boxing with him. So I did a boxing workout with him and he's putting me through like 5-minute rounds and I'm crushing it. He's like, you're like cardio's through the roof. I'm like, yeah, I spin twice a week for recovery. I like to be a well-rounded athlete. Yeah, I lift, but I still like to be functional, right? I can do it all. So I'm in better shape now than I've ever been in. And that's after having 2 kids and I'm 34. So, again, my point just being, I'm not out here to brag about it. I'm out here to share. Like, if I can do it, you can do it. Like, it is doable. My point being, it's doable. And so I want to help women feel inspired, feel like they can take control over their lives, again, with grace, with allowing yourself to have feelings and go through the hard stuff, but you can 100% get yourself to where you want to be. You want to be a competitive athlete, you're not too old. It's never too late. You can absolutely get to be the fittest version of yourself.
Lisa, thank you for that. I have some fire right there. I like it. I appreciate we've got so many questions for you, but at the same time, you're on vacation. I want to be respectful of your time.
You're good.
Where, any resource recommendations, and where can folks find you, on social media, et cetera, if they want more information about the Lisa Maximus?
So Lisa Maximus is my Instagram, and my email is Lisa@Lisa Maximus. So feel free to reach out to me there. I do coaching. So anyone who's working on, if you want to get your deadlift up, if you want to start training and getting a program together, I do all of that. And I also love answering questions on Instagram. So if you have a question about something that I said, or clear something up or go into more detail about it, please feel free to send me a DM. I personally answer all that stuff. I'm, again, very passionate about what I do, and want to help everyone out there who's going through, again, pregnancy is the hardest thing you can ever do. And coming back from it is hard, but is doable. So I want to be a resource for anyone who needs help with any of that stuff. So I'm here for you.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. Jennifer, you have any?
No, I thank you so much for your time, Lisa.
No, and yeah.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah, this is a great episode, and I do want to say to my male listeners, because I know it's sometimes uncomfortable, and Jennifer was listening to me talk a little bit about this, but I learned so much from this conversation. I don't know, while you guys were talking, I was just like taking notes, and I got to go home and ask my wife some questions. I mean, but no, I think it's important, for the male listeners to you got to understand this, and to learn about this is important conversations to have, particularly if you consider yourself a leader, and you're going to have different folks in your formation to understand kind of what they're going through when you're asking them to come back and maybe do certain things. Just kind of respecting that. I know as a father, I have a complete different perspective of childbirth and recovery and that. So all my males listening to that, get out there and learn, take notes. This was some great information. Lisa, again, thanks so much for sharing with us.
Of course. If you guys need anything from me, I'm, always here to help. So
awesome. Well, hey, go enjoy your vacation with your family.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.